get prepared in the background. So in about 2 or 3 minutes, we'll just invite the guest of honor, who is Salim Raza Saab, who is the ex-governor of the State Bank of Pakistan, and also our chief guest, Mr. Muhammad Ali, who is the chairman of the SECP. So just give us a few minutes to get things prepared from the back, from I guess what is known as the back end, and we'll commence the closing ceremony. Of the State Bank of Pakistan. Please also help me in, join me in welcoming Mr. Muhammad Ali, who's the chairman of the SECP. If you can also come join us on stage, sir. May I also request Mr. Uzair A. Hanafi, who's the executive chairman of the World Islamic Finance Summit, to join me on stage. And last but not least, also Mr. Sayyid Shahjahan Salahuddin, who is the MD Conferences and New Initiatives at Publicity House Private Limited. And since we are at that stage where we should get things going, may I please invite to the dais our guest of honor, Mr. Salim Raza, the former governor of the State Bank of Pakistan, to say a few words.
Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to see that there are some people still here. Normally at the end of two-day conferences, by the time this sort of event rolls around, there's no one there. So, thank you. Aakhri shab ke hum safar jo bhi hain. Padhiye night. I have just a few words to say, actually. And let me begin by welcoming all our visitors who've come to Pakistan, and indeed all the participants at this conference. And my congratulations to the organizers, because I think the timing of this conference is excellent. Against the backdrop of the global financial turmoil, I hope you've had a chance to think of the possibilities and new opportunities presented to Islamic banking. And I think these sessions should be more often, more frequent over the next few months in particular, as we see global financial conditions change and perhaps the nature of financial services alter. I don't think we're going to be looking at the same type of financial services, the same emphasis, the same players in the next 20 years as we've seen in the last 20. Now, in my comments, I'm just going to be general, talk a little about what's been happening in the broad financial markets, the outlook, and then I'll suggest some reasons why I think, general reasons, macro reasons, why I think Islamic banking is poised now for some of the greatest opportunities offered to it over the last several decades. In general, in financial markets, we're looking at an environment of volatile uncertainty. The policymakers this time, learning from the Great Depression, went into action very fast to salvage the balance sheet of banks. If you remember, in the Great Depression, one of the reasons why the Depression lasted as long as it did, not one of the causes of the Depression, but one of the reasons why it lasted as long as it did, was the collapse of a good part of the American banking system. And then through Kreditanstalt in Austria, a little of that problem came to Europe as well. But 11,000 out of 34,000 banks in the US collapsed. Ben Bernanke, the chairman of the Fed, had done his thesis on the Great Depression, and he is now one of the authorities, because the Great Depression is like a kaleidoscope. You give it into the hands of any economist, and he'll find you some new combination of reasons why it happened, what went wrong, what the wrong policy was, why it should have been done differently. But he holds his own because his paper was on debt deflation. And this was at a time when the only example in the world to look back to for this particular phenomena was the Great Recession. The Japanese debt deflation hadn't happened. He wrote his thesis in 1983. So his argument is very simple. It's very obvious now that if prices are falling faster than any interest rate, then that interest rate is utterly irrelevant. It can be zero, but it's not going to help anyone borrow. if prices are going to be 10% less, you will defer expenditure and you will hasten to repay your debt. So the banking system will shrink because credit will be run down, investment decisions will be postponed, expenditure decisions will be postponed. That's what happened in the Great Depression. Starting with the collapse of the banking system, you got massive unemployment. That unemployment led to low demand led to falling production led to further unemployment, and you were caught in a vicious circle. And the way out of this was, really, in the end, very simple. It's what Roosevelt adopted in 1934, and that was the Keynesian demand management. You've got to, even if you have to throw money out in piles from helicopters, do it, because unless demand comes back, production won't start. And to connect demand and production, you've got to have a solvent banking system. So that's why Bernanke went into action immediately, put a lot of money into banks, capitalized banks, provided banks liquidity, and took off the hands of banks a lot of their bad assets through the Troubled Asset Relief Program. UK did a bit of the same, Ireland did a bit of the same, Spain, and it seemed that it worked. We had only 1 year of negative growth, which was 2009. By 2010, the US was growing at 3%, Europe at 2%, and it seemed that we were well into recovery. Till several months ago, when all this talk of a second double dip started. And the rationale or the reasoning behind why people anticipate a second double dip is that growth has been falling. The second quarter growth fell sharply in Europe, fell sharply in America. And so growth falls, unemployment rises, demand falls further. In any case, consumers are repairing their balance sheets, they're not spending. And the banks are gun shy, the banks are nervous about new assets. So all this liquidity that had been created, between Europe and America, a few $1 trillion of liquidity, ended up back in government paper, didn't hit the real economy. So growth falling, interest rates about as low as they can be. What the market fears is that there's a negative loop back between the financial sector and the government that's at work here, and that will be very difficult to unwind. And that negative feedback is you created large fiscal deficits to solve the banking problem. Then you've got to solve the deficit problem, and you solve the deficit problem by cutting expenditure and raising taxes. Now, when you cut expenditure, raise taxes, you hit growth. When you hit growth, you hit businesses. When you hit businesses, that hits the balance sheet of banks. And when you hit the balance sheet of banks, you need another round of liquidity again, hence QE1, QE2, QE3. Last night, Ben Bernanke has done another one of his liquidity easing efforts, this time focused on interest rates, not so much on liquidity. He sold 3-year government bonds, and he's bought from 6 to 16-year government bonds. The idea is to get long-term rates to drop radically, because he's buying long-term paper, so the long-term paper will go up in price, which means the yield will come down, the effective interest rates will come down. And this is in order to try and repair the US mortgage market, bring long-term rates down so people start buying property again. But the issue, which the Fed can do nothing about, the issue isn't the cost of funds. It's not whether it costs a bank 1% or 0.5% to fund itself. The issue is the risk premium that the banks envisage. So the reason why lending isn't gathering hold is because the banks are risk averse, and even if their base cost, you can bring it down to 0, but then they'll put a spread of 5. I mean, Greece's credit default swap is about 19-20% today. Italy, 6.5% today. So those are just simply the market premiums that are reflected, that risk is measured in, and they're very substantial. So the IMF has lowered its growth forecast from this year from about 2.25 to 1.6. And the issue really is that the banking is a conveyor belt between the depositor, the saver, and the user, which is productive assets, that conveyor belt isn't working. Banks take money from depositors and they package them into loans for productive purposes. Banks transform maturities. They take a lot of short-term deposits and they make some long-term loans out of that. If that activity slows down for whatever reason, obviously production and therefore employment and therefore demand are going to lapse, are going to slow down, and then we're in this vicious circle, and we'll stay in the vicious circle. The problem, of course, is that the banking system, the banking problems haven't gone away. In addition to the older problem of U.S. mortgage, house debt against where housing, there hasn't been sufficient recovery, or there's been very little recovery in the prices of homes in America. Hence, the mortgage books of banks are still fraught with the risk that there may have to be significant write-downs. In Europe, a new set of issues has raised its head, and that's to do with this sovereign debt of the southern European countries. Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Spain, and Greece. There's about $800 billion owed, held by banks in the sovereign debt of these countries. Now, there'll have to be mark-to-markets. The question is how severe. If the problem of Greece can be confined to Greece, which is very difficult, if at least it looks like the Greek problem is being addressed out of the European leaders agreeing to a particular plan vis-a-vis Greece, then we might see a slowdown of the contagion effect from Greece to these other countries. Otherwise, you will have the contagion effect. And these amounts owed are just too significant in relation to the banks, to the capital of banks, to be ignored. And the IMF, therefore, the IMF has made a series of very almost panicky sounding statements in the last few days. And yesterday, Madame Lagarde called for a serious call for a recapitalization of the smaller banks by European governments. Because smaller banks, big banks are not lending generally, but they're also not lending in the interbank market as easily as they used to, and smaller banks will feel the strain. So the markets are nervous, the markets are overreactive, not so much because they see a catastrophe. The markets are nervous and reactive because they see an absence of leadership, or they see divided leadership. In the US, you must have read about the fact that the US technically almost defaulted, or in fact did default for a day or two, because the political parties have such a violent difference of opinions on what should be done. Similarly, in Europe, Germany, and supported by some Scandinavian countries, have absolutely no interest in getting involved with long-term bailouts of the southern periphery. The southern periphery, or at least Greece at this stage, may face a choice of having to decide whether they want to be in the euro at all. And if we go down that road, then we have unknown domino effects that could play out. Again, focusing on the banking system but affecting everything. But I don't think there's a doomsday scenario. I think, it's a different subject which we can talk about some other time, but I think sensible compromises will be made. And we shouldn't worry too much if the road back to recovery is slow. So if growth is slow this year, if it's slow next year, as long as the banking sector is being repaired, we'll chug out of this. Now, remember the bubble took 5 or 6 years to build up, and to think it could be, dispensed with and the world go back to normal as if, all those trillions of dollars of capital destruction in the form of derivatives exploding, to pretend that had never happened, and the only implication of that was 1 year of negative growth. I mean, that was, I think, over-optimistic. So if we have 3 or 4, even 5 years of low growth, we'll have to live with it. But that is not catastrophe. And so my view is that, low growth, but we will come out of it, intact. Now, just a few comments on Islamic banking. 3 reasons. I said that I would like to suggest some reasons, at a very macro level, why Islamic banking could see very rapid growth. Remember, so far I've talked about the developed world. But the core markets of Islamic banks, the IMF forecast for emerging market growth this year is 6.5%, 6.25%, which is 0.75% down from the original, from 7 to 6.25%. And that's not because so much because of the contamination from the West. I mean, China's surpluses are still very strong. It's more because of domestic inflation. I mean, you've seen it in China, you've seen it in India, and the fact that interest rates are being raised. China raised reserve requirements 5 times in the course of this year. So anyway, so 6.25% is still strong. For emerging Asia, the forecast is 8, for Latin America 4, for Central Europe and Turkey 6. OPEC Middle East, very strong, 7, 7.5. In fact, Qatar is at 19, the growth forecast. The non-oil Middle East, MENA countries, Middle East, North African countries, will probably see growth fall to about 1% this year. But all forecasts that I've seen, official and from private economists, suggest that Egypt, Tunisia, Jordan, Morocco could be back to between 3 and 4% rates of growth. So the core markets of Islamic banks are very strong. Now, as the big banks, which are still European and American, as they pull in their horns a little, for the reasons I've just mentioned, if they pull in that means they will be less aggressive in expanding market share everywhere. They may prefer certain emerging markets to developed markets, certain emerging markets to other markets, but everywhere they will not have the the drive, the force that you saw over the last 5 or 6 years. Some might. Hong Kong, Shanghai might grow very aggressively. Citibank might shrink. But overall, the momentum will not be as strong. So you're probably going to have unsatisfied demand in these Asian economies that are growing very strongly. And in addition to Islamic banking making encroachments itself, there will be new opportunity from the, I think some diminishment in the aggression of conventional banks who've been significant in that region in the past. So that's one reason, strong economies and possibly a greater competitive position for Islamic banks. The second is that the core principle of Islamic banking, i.e. profit from participation in production, has been shown to be the most reliable way that financial intermediation can create a path to economic growth. Financial capitalism, which is the creation of profits from leverage, from synthetic transactions, from highly contrived circular transactions, where a lot of money is created, but there is no counterpart in goods or services against that, that is going to be on the decline anyway. And this decline is not just the appetite of the banks that have been burnt, it's also what the regulators want. They want to ring fence the deposit side of the bank from the speculative side of the bank, which is where the investment banking side, which is where a lot of these transactions are developed. And they'll probably, over time, I think, put limits on how much a bank can do in proprietorial position taking in all these off-balance sheet or even on-balance sheet, but in all these leveraged financial speculative positions. Now, obviously, derivatives and that whole area of synthetics is necessary to people engaged in the real economy. It's necessary as a hedge. Every importer, every dealer in commodities, every manufacturer may want to hedge his position 2-3 years out, and therefore, to find a counterparty, banks will have to stay in those markets, stay in the derivative markets. But on the other hand, this is to serve market needs. It's to serve needs of the real economy. It's not to speculate financially for a financial reward with no economic consequence. Now, this is where, like I said, it will be, I think, more and more evident to people, and Islamic banks should take an advantage of this, that the participatory form of banking that Islamic banking involves, where all its activity has a counterpart in goods and services, I think both to regulators, I think regulators should wake up, and I think regulators have woken up. I think they're quite responsive. I know the State Bank is here. But regulators, I think, should give more liberty, or should encourage Islamic banks to go much further down the road. And Islamic banks, I haven't been here for the conference, so perhaps these things were discussed. But let me urge that you have to look at your business. Islamic banking is a business. You have to look at your business opportunities. You have to go out, look at what people do, how people transact. You've got to look, why is the Aarti still around as an entity? While at the State Bank, we had a few rounds of discussions with some of the Aartis. We sent teams out to spend 2 and 3 weeks in the areas where the Aarti dominated the financing, and this is in the cotton growing, wheat growing areas of southern and central Punjab. Now, the Aarti is a venture capitalist. The Aarti actually participates with his own money. Every morning he is there and he kicks the farmer out of his bed and gets him to the field if the farmer is asleep. But he actually oversees the production. He then looks for better seed, because the better the farmer does, the better he does. And in the end, he takes an arm and a leg in interest. But on the other hand, he takes the same risk as the farmer, because if there's a flood and the farmer goes down, the Aarti knows he can't ever recover that money from him. So we were trying to persuade the Aarti to look at, what would make the Aarti come into the official system. How big is the Aarti? I don't know. If bank loans in Pakistan are, what are they, 3.4, 3.5 trillion, thereabouts, is Aarti lending half a trillion? A trillion? We couldn't really make any sort of reasonable estimate out of it. But, that is an entire area that is equity lending, that is equity participation. But it has to be studied, it has to be approached very carefully. If Islamic banks can raise a series of products against how to finance the farmer. The Aarti would be a person who would show the way. There's also simple warehouse, what you call warehouse receipts, which is the common way of financing agriculture in the Philippines, in a lot of Asia. It's a document of title that you're trading, and that can be adapted into the Islamic stuff. But anyway, I do urge you, we were talking about, Islamic banking globally, but in Pakistan, I would urge you to look at opportunities that I really think are very much there. And I can assure you that the State Bank has a very positive attitude towards Islamic banking and will give you all the support. So that's the second reason. It's the nature of Islamic banking and the fact that today it's linked with actual production. It will remind people of what banking originally was supposed to be. Before it turned into something that was, financial capitalism as a purpose, with money being created out of money instead of economic activity. Not for most part, but for a significant part. Banks' earnings came a lot from position taking and derivative trading. Lastly, the third reason, I think, where Islamic banking has a terrific future, and where in several decades as a banker, it's very clear to me that SMEs will never get anywhere near the level of credit they need without parallel provision of capital. And why banks keep looking at SMEs as borrowers when their books are not straightforward, when sometimes wrong, when their collateral can rarely be kept in a shape where you can take a charge over it. So our SME lending has fallen from 17.5% to 10% in the last 3 years. Pakistan. Agricultural lending has fallen from 7.5% to 5%. Now, these are terrible trends. If you're talking about poverty and employment, these are the two worst signals for the future that you can come across. SMEs employ 90% of our labor, of our factory labor. Agriculture is, 22% of Pakistan's GDP. And if the banking system is withdrawing from these sectors in this way, then we have to sit and think it's wrong, and it's absolutely terrible for the country to have this situation developing. So how do we get the SMEs into the framework of active banking relationships? Well, I think the genuine Islamic banking transaction, where the Islamic bank is a partner and not a creditor, is the absolutely the best suited way of developing an SME portfolio or of providing assistance to the SMEs as a partner. In other words, you have an equity risk. And if you go in there as an equity lender and it's really structured as an equity risk, then a commercial bank will come in as well, because a commercial bank sees more of a capital base or more of capital strength than it would if the Islamic bank wasn't there. So anyway, I'll just leave those 2-3 thoughts. I think the opportunities, I didn't mean to talk about Pakistan, I meant to talk in a more global nature, but I think the opportunities for Islamic banking are absolutely terrific. I think the particular attributes of Islamic banking that make it distinctive and responsive to the real economy should be heralded, they should be announced. I think there should be many more conferences like this. Islamic banking should take a high profile. Anyway, those were just a few words I'd have. I'd be very keen to find out what went on at this conference, and perhaps when your minutes or your notes are ready, I'd like to have a copy of them. I hope you have planned a follow-up to decisions made in this meeting. It would be nice to see, intellectual exchanges like this, convert into implementable ideas. And I mentioned earlier to Mr. Hanfi that, a conference should be a standing conference. People can go away, but there should be a secretariat that tracks things that were agreed. If opinions had to be taken, if Sharia opinions had to be taken, if approvals had to be taken, someone tracks all that and keeps everyone else informed. So all of the participants here representing Islamic institutions, so you can progress together on a common front and strengthen each other in terms of product knowledge and product opportunities, because it's still, you're not feeding the enemy when you feed another Islamic bank, because you're still very small in terms of a market share. The first collective aim must be to double market share in 2-3 years. It can be done. And at this stage, in certain ways, you should all work collectively. You can compete, and you will compete in particular. But the more important thing at this size is to think in terms of how to gain more collective mass. Thank you very much.